Derek Cornelius has signed with Marseille, and Moise Bombito is about to sign with Nice. We have two of our starting center backs moving to a top five league, which is basically bringing up the topic for today's video, which is the state of the Canadian men's national team back four. So, Alex, we're going to go right away into this because if you look at our back four right now, we got players playing at high level clubs: Celtic, Marseille, Nice, and Bayern Munich. So I'm going to start off with the first question today, and it's just to kind of take a look at Cornelius and Bombito maybe paving the way for other young Canadian center backs moving their way to Europe. Because I've noticed a bit of a trend when it comes to leagues getting comfortable with Canadian players. We've seen Scotland do it for years now. Canadian players going over there, finding success. Alistair Johnston, Theo Bair are two great examples of that. And taking a look at Liga, when you have a player like Jonathan David thriving for many years now, maybe makes it a little bit easier for teams to look at these Canadian players and bringing them in. So do you think that this could pave the way for even more Canadians, specifically center backs, moving to big leagues in Europe?
Absolutely. I think it's something to monitor because it's the reality is there's always trends that the market follows. Ultimately, the market there's always some brave thinkers, right? Like there's always some teams that will think outside the box, right? Like a few years ago it was unheard of to use data to help buy players. And now like a couple of clubs have done it well, and there's more copycats of teams figuring out how to use data to get some good signings and follow the Moneyball models or efficiency models at the likes of a Brighton, or, have followed Union Saint-Gilloise, Union Berlin, some of these clubs, right, that have kind of popped up with these seasons out of nowhere. It's all about trends, right? At one point in the market, Brazilians were considered a risk, and now it feels like you get they're a safe commodity where you go to Brazil each year, you get the top youngsters, some of them at 15, 16, they're signing for top clubs in the world, like Endrick, right? Like that's the sort of commodity they are. Canada's in a place where it's taken time. Like just years ago, Alfonso Davies goes to Bayern. It was kind of like, oh, okay, like there's a Canadian at a top environment. Now you look now, just years later, 5, 6 years after that move happened, you got your Jonathan Davids, you got your Ismail Kones, you got your Stefan Eustachios, guys who were able to move up to some of the elite, right, across the board. So 100%, I think it's trends for Canada. It just started with promising youngsters, then it kind of moved across to some reliable midfielders, a lot of forwards, and now I think defenders they're going to realize you can get some value with Canadian defenders, and the fact that some of these teams like Nice and Marseille were willing to pay 5 to 7 million for from our perspective, this is great to see because those are good fees, well deserved fees for two great center backs. But from their perspective, that's cheap. You see what center backs are going for. What Todibo, just went to West Ham for. You see over the last few years, been defenders selling for 50, 60, 70 mil. They're laughing. You have to remember this is a market inefficiency. And right now, Canada's in a unique spot where these guys are starting to be a market inefficiency. And that's where they become really valuable.
Absolutely. And I think Liga is going to play a big role in this. And there's a few reasons before, but it's a fascinating topic because when you talk about the Moneyball system, you look at the other big four leagues, you usually see the top clubs, it's scaled down, but you see the top clubs being the buying clubs, the ones that want to compete, they go out there and they will spend money. And then it's the teams that kind of fall down the table when they start to find, if they have a gem, they'll have them for maybe a year or two, sell them, and then try to strategically replace that player. Liga is different because it is a top five league. It's an excellent league. And when we have an upcoming nation like Canada and we have our players looking to go to Europe, instead of landing in a Netherlands, Belgium, which are good leagues, Switzerland, and you can all of a sudden find your way over to Liga, that's huge. But it's because, there's issues going on with that league. The TV rights have been a disaster. There's revenue issues. Teams don't have as much money as they used to. So like when you mentioned, when they're looking to bring in some money, they'll sell one of their stars and they'll have to find these budget buys. And when Canadian players keep going over to Europe and find success, it gives them more confidence to bring in a player like that. And now all of a sudden, Alex, we're looking at our back line and we have two center backs, our two starting center backs that went to a major tournament at the 2024 Copa America, played really well, were not sold for a lot of money. And now we have two of them playing at top, not even just teams in Liga, two top teams, two historic teams in Marseille and Nice. I think that this could be, despite Liga, I don't want to see the league struggle, but it seems like because they are a little bit, it's really opening the door for Canadians to go over there. And Theo Bair is another example, a player that thrived in Scotland and is getting taken a chance right now and could be a striker that could maybe be in for a big season.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Liga again, like you say, sometimes one's crisis is one's opportunity, and I think there's good potential to be had there from that perspective. Because, for example, what has been the market Liga has they've thrived in for the last decade or even 15, 20 years. It's been the African market. They've done so well of knowing that if you go to some of those academies, Senegal has been a fantastic one. Morocco has been a big one. You see with all the Moroccans playing in Liga, Algeria, uh, you name it. Mali has been one that's really popping off lately. Guinea. They realized, okay, like you can go and get these guys for 2 mil, 1 mil, 5 mil, bring them up, and then you have these great, Sadio Mane stories where he starts out like at a Mets, and now you ended up becoming a superstar. But of course, teams got smart and realized that like there's talent there. Let's all look, and it's something where there's no more secrets in Africa anymore. For example, the same way there's no more secrets in South America. The reality is when there's an Endrick, when there's a lot of these top players coming out of South America, like you see with Kendrick Pais, the young Ecuadorian that Chelsea snapped up, these who they are. And I think for Canada the reality is, since it's of course they knew who Davies was, they knew who some of these youngsters were, but there's still a reality that after that there's a lot of undiscovered gems, and Bombito is a perfect example. This guy was playing community college a few years ago, not just NCAA. He was playing community college, like last chance university, redemption, that sort of vibe, and now he's playing in Liga. I think the fact that Liga teams will realize, like, oh, that's the sort of level of talent that's being ignored and undiscovered in Canada. We'll absolutely look at it, and I think it's a good match, and it's the same way that Brightons have done so well of finding those gems. How we'll just use them as a Canadian example. Union Saint Gilloise signed Promise David out of the Estonia League because it all matched up. Like smart clubs do business like that. And I think Liga, they might be the last point of this long-winded one.
Yeah.
What those crises do is it force teams to be creative, because it's easy to be Premier League and you're getting all this TV money, Champions League money, and you can spend 40 million to solve your striker problem. You can spend 40 million to fix your center back problem. When you don't have money, it forces you to be creative, and that's where it benefits Canadians.
And it can continue to do so. Using Nice as an example, Tadibo was sold for big money. You sign Bombito on a bargain deal, and then all of a sudden he does well. You sell him for big profit. So it can continue to do well where you bring in a player that performs for you, replaces the big like player you just sold, and all of a sudden, if he does well, you got to sell him as well. So it's really Canadian players helping Liga and Liga helping Canadian players because it allows them to develop their game further, which makes us Canadian fans happy. And that's where we're going to kind of look at, Alex. It's a bit of a surprise when we've started following the sport. At least when I did following this national team, and I assume you did as well. When you look back down memory lane at some of the back fours, back fives this Canadian program has put out there at tournaments, it's crazy to look at the team and the back four specifically that we have now, because it's not what it used to look like. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look through a few different back fours throughout the years and just kind of compare and talk about the players that were there and the clubs they were at. So the first back four we are going to look at is from the 2017 Gold Cup. So at right back, Michael Petrasso from QPR, which is respectable. Very, good club. That was an exciting young player back in the day. We have Steven Vittoria, familiar name, from Lehia Gdańsk, which is a player that's been around this national team for a very long time. We have Dejan Jankovic from New York Cosmos, and we have Marcel de Jong from the Vancouver Whitecaps back in 2017. When you take a look at those four players, Alex, does it bring back some memories?
Yeah, what a tournament that was! 'Cause, that Gold Cup I'll forever associate with the Alfonso Davies breakout. Right, he was scoring goals against French Guyana, and that was a bit of a like turnaround. I think, of course, there's a lot of moments you could look at in terms of the start of this Canadian turnaround. I know 2019 there was a lot of them with like that US win. You can even go into 2021 in that World Cup cycle. But 2017 felt like the start, because in 2015 it was like a low. They had the Gold Cup where they didn't even score a goal, and it was just like disappointment. And then in 2017 they had a good tournament. They got out their group, which was nice. Yeah, they then fell in the quarterfinals. Hey, that back line, it was solid. It wasn't no unattached FC. Yeah, I mean, Yakovic playing at the Cosmos. It's hilarious to look back. Like, what a throwback that is, but solid.
No, it is solid. Like we could have went back even further, but I didn't want to go back all the way to like 2012. I wanted to take a look in the last under decade to kind of see what the player pool looked like and how it developed. So that was 2017. Well, fast forward 2 years to 2019, which is a very memorable Gold Cup for myself, watching a few players put up some big performances. The back four there was at right back. We had Marcus Godinho, who was split between Hearts and Zwickau. We have Atiba Hutchinson, who this kind of shows the depth we had at the back four position because we didn't really have another center back that was there. So we threw in Atiba Hutchinson, who is a natural, central midfielder playing at DM. He was at Besiktas at the time, which is a big club. We had Derek Cornelius, so interesting to see the way that Cornelius was back there all the way back in 2019. He just signed for the Vancouver Whitecaps and only just became a center back not long before that. And then at left back, we had Mark Anthony Kay, a central midfielder who was thriving during his LAFC days, but he's not a left back. He was he's a left-footed player, which he often found himself kind of get stuck back there. But in that 2019 Gold Cup run, we had a back four that consisted of two players that were midfielders. So it just kind of shows, and this was a fun tournament when you look back on the memories with Jonathan David scoring 6 goals, Cavallini scored 5. They had the big shock against Haiti. Kind of ended on a sour note, but what do you make of that back four, Alex?
It's funny because there's not even like the most intriguing of stories because there was a lot of rotation that tournament. Like Alfonso Davies played a bunch at left back at that time, but that was kind of before he'd broken out as a left back for Bayern, right? Because at that point, 2019, he'd just, I guess, arrived earlier that year, so he hadn't broken through as he would, I think, later that fall. So he was playing at left back. You also had Daniil Henry slotting in for a couple. Um, of moments. Yeah, you also can't forget Canada played a completely wild lineup against Mexico that they rotated for, which included Zachary Broguiar playing at right wing back and Russell Tybert was playing left wing back. Like that tournament, just like John Herdman kind of. That was an interesting time. He was just really experimenting. So I always think of 2019. This comment will always stick to me is when then Herdman then went on TSN during like one of the MLS games, and he said something along the lines of, "We've got some tier one players now," like referring to Davies, David, those guys who had broken up. And then he's like, "We're just right now we're kind of operating with tier three defenders." And when you look back at some of the names they threw all over in that tournament, like you see what he meant because the fact that he had to play midfielders at the back and all that is chaotic times.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the Canadian fans were looking back to around those 2018, 2019, 2020 days with the makeshift back four, heavy, talented strikers, some midfielders, wingers, and it was the back four that was really an issue, which is the whole reason we're doing this video today. When you fast forward 3 years from that, we're going to look at the 2022 World Cup. I think that's where you see the most improvement around a little bit of depth, some players taking some steps up. But even when you compare it to now, 2 years later, there is still quite a bit of a change. So when you look at that World Cup back four, there's two options really there at right back. You had Alistair Johnson, who's breaking out. When he moved to CF Montreal, I think that's when he was really good at Nashville, but he took a nice big step at Montreal, which got him that move to Celtic. You have Richard Larea, who made it clear he wanted to go to Europe. He obviously, has always done well at TFC. He got the move to Nottingham Forest. Barely featured, but he was there at the time, so Nottingham Forest-ish. You have Steven Vittoria, who obviously we mentioned back in 2017, but it was a big part of this team with Chavez. We had Kamal Miller, who kind of broke it through a little bit, becoming that left-sided center back at CF Montreal. And then we had Sam Adekugbe, who was out in Turkey with Hatayspor. So you have players that are playing consistent minutes, some, throughout Europe at decent leagues with Portugal and Turkey. You had players that were pushing to go to Europe, like Larea did. Johnson eventually went. You had a good MLS center back in Kamal Miller. You could definitely see a big step up in those 3 years between 2022 and 2020 or in 2019, but not quite where we are at yet, Alex, in 2024.
Oh, it was good progress, right? Like Larea in a bit of a limbo. I think at that point he was even on loan back to TFC. What a strange year that was for Larea in hindsight. In a World Cup year, Adekugbe was a big one. I think he was someone where you can't forget the work he did. Where like his story was a good one where like he was at Whitecaps, didn't really, fully get the chance. He had a loan to Brighton back in the day. Then he went to, Norway with Valerenga, did well at Norway, went to Hatayspor, had the chance to go play for Galatasaray. Like Adekobi, but again, that was kind of the big things where fullbacks, Canada's kind of slowly, even when you look back, like to De Jong and Petrasso. Like those are two solid, capable fullbacks in 2017. But yeah, it's the center backs where you see the progress. Like it was good to have Vitória regularly playing in the Portuguese league, doing well at the, he was doing very well at the time. You have Kamal Miller and Johnson doing great in MLS, but it was kind of one of those where again there was good, but there was maybe missing that like all right that next step of center backs, and yeah, it's something to look back at. It's funny to see.
And here we are, 2 years from the 2022 World Cup. We go to the 2024 Copa America. Canada finishes fourth. Their back four, brand new, barely, if ever, played together, like together in a back four like that, and they thrive so much where two of the players get moves to a top five league. And now we have an Alistair Johnston who got the move to Celtic, where he's one of their most consistent and best players, best probably right back in that league. There's a chance maybe he could take a step up in the next year or so. Bombito gets the move to Nice. Very excited to see how he does there. Cornelius goes to Marseille, and Alphonso Davies goes back. You get one of our, our best player basically going to his natural position. He's been a Champions League winner. He's the most talented, only world class player at the CONCACAF level with Bayern Munich. That's an incredible looking back four compared to what it was back in 2017. And I'm hoping that there's more to come. Not like there's going to be another development in a couple of years. We co-host a World Cup in 2026. Do you think that it could be this back four still, Alex? Because I think with the age and the profiles, this could potentially be the back four we see in 2 years' time.
Yeah, it feels like you could see this for years to come. That's what's the most exciting about it. It's not just you see Johnston Celtic and Bombito Nice, Cornelius Marseille, Davies Bayern. It's that like you got to remember their ages, right? Like it's something where I don't think any of them are done growing. And you know what? As wild as it is to say, they all have different steps they can all take. Just to for some context, Alistair Johnson's 25. Like again, very much like in his prime, entering his prime. You can argue on that. Alfonso Davies just 23, which is absurd. You got Moise Bombito 24, and you got Derek Cornelius 26. But I remember for a center back, 26 is kind of like 22, 23, where you're still early. 24, you're still early, especially just making that jump up to the level. Like could you not imagine Bombito having 2 or 3 good years and moving on at 27? Could you not imagine Cornelius having 2 or 3 good years at Marseille and potentially moving on? Davies, we know the Real Madrid interest is there. Johnson feels like he's going to finish at a higher level than where he is now. Like there's potential, but then also what's exciting about all this is how quickly things can change. Like we have to remember 18 months ago, essentially, Moise Bombito was a kid just hoping to get drafted and play in MLS. Like now he's at Nice and he's the long term starter for this Canadian men's national team. Things change so quickly in this sport. And I think that's what's so exciting is that you look at this back four, you look at all the potential, but you could also say in 2 years of the World Cup, one of these guys isn't here. And that's probably, if that happens, that means that someone else stepped up and had a similar journey. And I think that there's potential for that is wild. Because think about Ismail Kone. He was on zero people's radar at the beginning of 2022. He made his professional debut in 2022, and by the end of the year he was at the World Cup thriving, doing well. Like it's things change quickly, and that's what we have to remember.
That's the great news, especially for some positions of need, because the center back position was always the hot topic with Canadian circles. Is when are some proper center backs going to come out and help this back line? Well, I'd say we're in a pretty comfortable position right now. My only real worry from wingers to eights, tens. I mean, another 10 would be nice too. So that could be part of this. Strikers, our fullbacks. I would like to see a six come from somewhere. But if we look at this, that's the positive news for other positions is who knows what could happen from right now in 2024 to 2 years time before the 2026 World Cup. Where's that next gem coming from? And what kind of development could we see? Because just because it's not a player that we're very familiar with right now, or even a player that we know about, but is still young and not overly proven, look what can happen. And all of a sudden, if we can find a little bit more depth in some other positions of need, I mentioned the six, a 10, I think would be nice, Alex. I off the top of my head, I don't know if there's really some other positions I'm desperate for talent to come out. Before that 2026 World Cup, we could have a pretty well-rounded team to give Jesse Marsh options. If you wanted to do a proper three-man system, if you wanted to have a 10, if depending what he wanted to do, he's got those options. Where a lot of times at the international level, when you don't have depth all around, you're kind of sometimes shoehorned into playing a certain way.
Yeah, and Canada's in a unique position where, for worse, they've struggled to identify talent that so that, like Jesse Marsh has said, Bombito, discovered now. Great, great story. He's about to play at Nice at 24. But if this was the story he had, like imagine if he had the chances, imagine if he got pro minutes at 18, 19, 20, etc. But that's disappointing because you wonder about all the Bombitos you miss, but it's also exciting because you can still find them. It's not too late. And I think it's super exciting to now know that these guys can literally come out of nowhere. That you literally like you can't write people off. Like I think that's the most exciting. Like of course the 16, 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-olds because there's a bunch of them playing in CPL, MLS, Europe. Great. Those guys have potential. They're exciting. But I think of like the guys like a Bombito who came out of literally nowhere, like super draft. How many times do you laugh at, oh, this guy got drafted in a super draft? What can he do? It turns out he can he can play for Nice within a year. I think of, even a guy like Kone where he was younger, right? He was like 18, 19. He literally came out of nowhere. He went from like just boom, dropped in and he's playing. Like I think it's exciting to know that. Yes, of course, we know who some of the top kids are now, but because of talent identification, maybe the next big thing we're watching is playing in League One. Maybe he's playing in some unknown academy in Europe. Maybe he's playing in MLS. We don't know, but it's nice to know that they can be found.
Not every player's path is the same, and there's definitely a lot of talent spread across the world right now. So, who really knows what that back four could look like, or even the team could look like in 2 years' time? Canadian talent keeps popping out from everywhere. But that's all the time we have on the video today. So, let us know down in the comment section what you thought of it, what you thought of the different back fours that you've seen over the years from this Canadian men's national team. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub, and see you guys soon. Cheers, friends.